Hello and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training. My name is Wesley Richmond and I'm the communications coordinator at Africa Fire Mission. And we are happy that you took time out of your busy schedules today to join us for today's training. Today we're joined by Mike and myself. Mike is the programs coordinator for Africa Fire Mission. He'll be going over his training today. If you stay for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 to 45 minutes, you will receive a certificate of attendance for the training today. Keep an eye on the chat as we will send a link over to where you can find materials from today's training and some other materials that you can use for trainings and fire prevention. Before we get started, we'll have a brief moment for some words of encouragement, and then we will get right into today's training.
Okay, I am ready to go here. I'm going to just, I think, try to jump right into our training here.
Sounds good.
Just a minute here. Sorry, everybody. Our instructor was on the wrong time zone with our time change that we had in the U.S. So I'm actually in Kenya at the moment. So I had to jump on here quick. We're going to cover, or try at least to cover, this topic that we had here of some type of a scene size up. And this will be a good lead in to next week, because next week we're going to be doing we're going to be doing some building construction. So we're starting off here taking a look at some scene size up and how that sort of applies to what we're doing so far as building construction. Like I said, that hopefully will be our topic for next week. As we're sizing up the scene, we're taking a look at uh, all the different angles of what we're looking at here. So here you can see, I don't know if anybody knows where this is or what this incident is here that we're looking at, but um, this might be familiar to some of you all. We're taking a 360-degree look, right? Looking around, trying to get around all sides of the building to see what's going on. If you don't get to that back side of the building, you may not have a good idea of what's actually taking place there. It's really important. We're going to do that 360-degree survey. It's going to help us with things like victim survivability, indicators of the fire location, which floor the fire's involved on if we're talking a multi-story building. Smoke conditions, right? Looking at the smoke condition, judging what that may be. What do we need for forcible entry, right? What do we need to force our way into the building? Looking for any kind of utilities that serve the building, like gas lines or something like that we may need to shut off. Other hazards, the type of building construction. Are there other buildings threatened, or are there other exposures that are threatened? Or is it just the contents inside the building that might be involved? Is the whole building involved? Lots of different stuff to look at. Is the fire venting? Is the fire breathing? Has it got a good intake and exhaust outlets? What's that going to do to the fire? So lots of different possibilities there. Okay, is the fire ventilated? And what about resources? Do you have enough to handle that incident? Do you need some more? What are we looking for there? Okay. Size up. Why is it important? Why is it important to size up the building and the hazards? Well, starting off the bat right away, of course, we're looking at some of that firefighter safety things, right? It increases our safety when we know what we're dealing with, what the hazards are. It helps us to figure out the proper tactics that we might want to employ. It also helps us to maybe change our tactics. If we size things up and we see that what we're doing isn't quite working, maybe we can change our tactics based on what we saw in that size up to get a better action. And part of that scene size up, why it's important, every incident we should be developing, if not a written, certainly in our mind, some kind of incident action plan, right? So with that incident action plan, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to attack this problem or this fire. Okay, we can do these scene size ups on any type of incident. We're going to look sort of how it relates to building construction and that sort of thing. In this particular one, we're going to size up all of our incidents. Right now here in Kenya, I'm teaching some active bleeding control classes. Uh, and in there, it's scene size up. If we see somebody's injured, we've got to size up the scene. So that's all part of it. Right? Helps us to figure out what we need to do, how we can do it effectively and efficiently. Very important. And then something we like to talk about, it's called the rescue profile. Like what are we trying to save? What is that? What's our life? What's the profile of what we're trying to save? The hazards to life, the building profile, what kind of conditions exist within the building that'll let us do what we want to do, or maybe won't. Maybe we take a look at that building construction style. We say, well, it's too compromised for us to enter the building. Okay. And then we're also looking at that fire profile. What's the smoke doing? What's the fire doing? Is everything banked down and it's very dark and black, where we can't really see what we're doing? Is it pushing, heavy smoke out the windows? What's that kind of stuff doing to try to give us a profile, that type of fire that we might be dealing with? Okay. When do we start doing this scene size up? Right? Really, this scene size up begins as soon as we get the call, right? Maybe even you could say that it starts before the call. What do we call a scene size up that we do before we get the emergency call? That's our pre-plan, right? So that's how we're going to pre-plan what we're doing. So we're going to take those as soon as that call comes in. That's where we're building this size up. We're thinking back, have we pre-planned an incident in this area? Do we know of any hazards already that are there? So as soon as we receive that alarm, any of the information that they give us, right? Here we're looking at a picture with from some type of an informal settlement. Okay, those informal settlements. Would we treat an informal settlement fire differently than an estate fire? Sure, right? There's different hazards, the spacing of the buildings. So we're starting to think about that as it comes in. If the initial report says there's one or two shanties on fire, or there's 100, right? So we're preparing that scene size up. We're developing that picture in our mind as we're responding. We're starting already with the information that we know. That this scene size up can be, conducted by a various number of people, right? Uh, Everybody on the fire appliance can start doing this size up as they get there. Everybody's doing their own individual size up. Whoever's going to be the incident commander, making sure that they're getting that whole thing right. Everybody's going to be doing something, sizing things up as they go, and then sharing that information to come up with the plan. Right. What do we know before we arrive, right? Do you recognize the address? Maybe it's a place that you've been to a lot, or maybe they just dispatch you to a specific area. Do you know that area? Is that something that you're familiar with? So you start thinking, is it residential? Is it a commercial? Are we in the industrial district? What are we looking at so far as that goes? Have you been there before? Maybe that's an indicator of what could be going on if you've been there before. Do they typically have fire alarms or lots of little small fires that they put out before you get there? That might give you some information. Maybe you learned something from a different type of call there, whatever it may be. As we're going, before we've got on the scene, take a look at the weather, get an idea of do we have some strong winds today? What directions might those winds be coming from? Just like bushfire, wind can have a very significant impact on a structure fire. So we want to factor that in, the current weather. What time of the day is it? Okay. In the commercial district, if we have a fire in the middle of the night, our likelihood of the building being occupied might be lower. If it's a residential area, depending on where you're at, in some residential areas, they may not have as many people in them during the daytime because they're away at work. So how does the time of day play into what we're doing? As you're coming down the street, can you see any smoke? Make an observation. What's the amount of smoke? What color's the smoke? How's the smoke moving? Okay, some different things that we can look at there. We're going to consider that every structure that we arrive to is occupied in some way until we've determined that it isn't. All right. So as we're approaching, we're going to consider that the building is occupied. Maybe when you first arrive on scene, you get that face-to-face contact with somebody and they're going to tell you, hey, the building's empty, we've checked it or whatever. But if we don't have that information, we're going to operate on the assumption that there's occupied people in that building, we're going to have to try to execute some sort of a plan for a rescue. Okay. And then what other resources are responding? Some of you may be operating out of a single station that's located farther away from some other stations, so you may not have those additional resources, but maybe you've got a contract with a local water bowser that can bring you some water, or you work hand in hand with the local military base. Maybe you need to call them. So start thinking about those resources that you may need. Do you have enough? Do you need to call for more? Okay. I'd mentioned that term pre-plan. You know, that's a walkthrough of the building. If you've as you've got new structures being built within your primary response area, it's always good to try to get out there and take a look at those while they're under construction, so you can learn about the building and you can be prepared in case something goes wrong. You'll know the type of building construction, and that sort of stuff ahead of time. So that's our pre-arrival. All right. Now we've approached and here we are, we're on the scene, right? So we've arrived, we've got all this information in the back of our head that we talked about, that we were thinking about as we were coming up on the scene. Now we've actually arrived. We're here at the site where the fire is at. What are we looking for? I mentioned it before, doing this 360. Maybe I didn't describe what I mean by a 360. 360 refers to the number of degrees in a circle, right? There's 360 degrees in a circle. We want to walk that circle. We want to look at the building from every single of those 360 degrees around the building, right? We want to look all around to get an idea of what's going on. We're looking for victims. Are there people in there? Is everybody out? Do we know if there's anyone inside? Are there victims at the window? The most likely place that we find people when a building's on fire, most likely location that we find them are near a door or a window. So that's one of those first places we're going to look. That's good if we don't have the PPE to get us deep inside the building, to try to at least check right at those doors and windows as we get there. What kind of access do you have to the building? Start to sum that up a little bit. Are we going to do an offensive mode where we're going to be attacking the fire directly? Maybe we're going to try to attack it from the inside. Where are we going to take those hoses? If we're in a defensive posture where we're looking at just sort of protecting the staying outside, we can't get inside. What's our best way to attack that? As we're doing our circle, our 360, we're locating what the best locations to do that defensive attack from the outside, or where can we get in to start to make our fire attack where it may be safe. Okay. Look for some other hazards that may be there. Maybe there's some mechanical hazards there, electric cables, that sort of stuff. What can they be? There's some other hazards around as we're walking around the building. Maybe there are some open wells, or some changes in the terrain that could be slip or fall hazards. What's our collapse zone going to be? And I think we'll talk about collapse zone a little bit later in this. Okay. Locating where the fire's at, right? Trying to figure out where in the building the fire's at, so how we can locate it. Maybe looking at, is there any way that we can control the ventilation? Maybe we should be closing some doors, pulling some windows shut to try to prevent the ventilation to the fire. Lots of different things. So we're doing all that sort of stuff as we arrive on scene. We're also evaluating what we call an exposure. And what I mean by an exposure is another building or something else close to the fire. It's exposed to the heat of the fire, maybe radiant heat coming off of it, that could catch itself on fire because it's so close to the main fire, right? So what are those exposures? What do we have to protect, or what do we have to do to keep that fire from spreading from building to building? That's some of the things we're going to be doing as we arrive there on the scene. We talked about fire behavior indicators a little bit before. I mentioned the smoke. We'll talk a little bit more about that now, right? It's something that we call reading smoke. There's some courses available out there. The Art of Reading Smoke. It's a really interesting course where they talk a lot about the the particular qualities of the smoke and what that may mean, what that may indicate so far as what the fire behavior is. All right. So, looking at that smoke, we're looking for the volume of smoke. Is it just a very light, wispy smoke like you might see off the start of a cooking fire? Or is it something like we've got here in the image on the screen where we have this dense smoke? Where is it coming from? Uh, in this picture, we've got a very large volume of smoke there. Um, where is it coming from? Here it looks like it's rising from the whole this terminal building here. Okay, what's the color of the smoke? There's a lot we can tell by the color of the smoke. Um, uh, Looking at this particular image here, I can see that there's a lot of unburnt fuel within that smoke. That dark, dense, high volume of smoke. That tells me the fire's really working. It's not getting complete combustion. And I'm looking at that smoke, and sometimes maybe you've heard smoke is described as it's fuel that's waiting for you to make a mistake, right? That dark, dense black smoke like that contains lots of things that can ignite, and that whole column could turn into a ball of flame if it gets that right proportion of heat, fuel, and oxygen. So that can tell us a whole lot about what's going on in the fire as we analyze the color, the density, and the velocity of that smoke. Whether the smoke's puffing, sometimes we see the short little puffs. Okay, that can indicate conditions. Maybe a backdraft is about to occur, right? So, reading that smoke, the velocity of the smoke, is it very turbulent? Is it churning? Is it moving? Is it very sort of violent? The movement of what we call the neutral plane. If you look inside the building and you can see a clear division between the smoke above and clear air below, where those two meet, we call that the neutral plane. Dependent upon whether that neutral plane is rising, falling, or staying in the same place, gives us an idea of what the fire behavior is inside the building. Okay, so we're looking at all those different things. Um, Maybe some of that color of smoke might be telling us what's burning as well, right? We're looking at the flow path, okay? Any fire needs to, that fire needs to be fed. It needs heat, fuel, and oxygen. That oxygen is coming in through some sort of an opening. Wherever that fire's drawing air, drawing oxygen into the building, that's the intake flow path. Wherever that fire is pushing all of that heat and smoke out of the building, that's the exhaust flow path, right? And by looking at where the air is going into the building and where the fire and smoke is exiting the building is going to give us an indication of how that fire may travel through the building. All right, so that's called our flow path. And if we change that flow path with improper ventilation or something, we open some windows or some doors and create more intake flow paths, we're going to fuel the fire. If we make new exhaust flow paths, we may change the course of the fire and bring it and draw it into a part of the building that's not already burnt. So lots of things that we can evaluate there with fire behavior. Okay. You can also look for indicators of heat. You might see the paint blistering from the other side of the wall. You might see bubbling tar, cracked glass. All right, all sorts of indicators of what the heat is doing inside the building or where there are hot spots in the building. If you're fortunate enough to have some type of a thermal imager or some kind of infrared sensing data, that can also help you out evaluating that heat. Uh, and then, of course, we talked about smoke, we're talking about heat. The flame itself, if you can see that flame, that's going to give you an indication of the size of the fire. It may point to what the location of the fire is, maybe the extent of the fire, or how the fire is reacting to the water that you're placing on it by watching those visible flames, right? If we can see flames from the outside, that lets us assess things like the flame indicators, can show us the kind of ventilation, which direction the flames may be leaning or something like that. Tell us if we've got good airflow. So lots of different stuff that we can look for to help indicate the fire behavior. Whole bunch of different building construction types. We're gonna look at building construction next week, so I'm not gonna get into that too much, but that certainly is part of your scene size up. What type of construction do you have? And you give it a wide variety, right? You've got these commercial buildings made out of non-combustible materials, lots of concrete and steel, down to you may have small tin shacks or shanties, anything in between. Some of the communities you may have, the buildings may be predominantly built of wood with like a straw thatch roof. So we're going to evaluate that and how that building construction may be a factor in our extinguishment of the fire. Building condition. What's the condition of the building as we approach? We start to look at that. Uh, um, the building condition can really influence potential for structural collapse, right? As the building is subjected to fire, that can weaken the structural components. If you're looking at a very old building that maybe it hasn't been maintained well, or maybe it's a property that's been abandoned for a long time, there's a greater risk of collapse from those, right? The buildings have been deteriorating. They haven't had the proper upkeep and maintenance. So they're going to have a higher potential of collapsing during some sort of a disaster or a fire compared to newer properties that are properly maintained and they're lived in or being worked in or something like that. As the structures age, and any structure as it gets built, those building components are aging. As building components age, right, there's always some sort of weakening, especially with things like wood as they dry out or things like that. So structures age is something that factors in there a little bit more. I'd mentioned abandoned buildings. If you're looking at abandoned buildings, you know, they pose a greater risk. You never know what the inside of that building's going to look like. Maybe everything has been stripped out and sold by somebody. Maybe there's people living in there that have made alterations. Maybe they've removed walls that were structural supports, and you don't know that. The building becomes involved with fire. What kind of hazard could that pose to you when structural supports were removed by somebody that's living in the building illegally? Maybe they've strung up, you think this is an abandoned building, but it turns out that people have gotten in there and they've hooked up those illegal electrical connections. So you're expecting that there's no power in the building, but someone has rigged some wiring in there or something. So lots of different things that you may need to be cautious of with the building construction as we're evaluating the building as part of our scene size up. Knowing how long the fire's been burning certainly is another factor here that we want to consider. The longer the components are of the building structure are exposed to fire, they make all sorts of changes. Okay, structural steel, those steel I-beams, when they're exposed to high temperature, those I-beams can exposed to heat, they're going to begin to stretch, they're going to begin to expand. As those beams expand, they may cause the concrete that surrounds them to crack, or you get a spalling where the concrete starts to crack and come apart because of the exposure to heat and flames. So the longer that fire's been burning, this is common sense, right? The longer that the fire's been burning, the longer the building components have been exposed to fire, the greater the potential we may have for some type of a structural collapse or something like that. Still thinking about this scene size up. Um, just a quick review of the different stages of fire, right? So when the fire begins, we call that the incipient stage. Incipient stage. When the fire's just starting. It's the start of the fire. The fire is very small. Maybe it extinguishes itself and we don't get an incident out of it. Or maybe the fire progresses and carries on, right? So that's the next step, fire growth. That's the next step that we're looking at, where we've gotten through the incipient phase, the there's during that incipient phase, right? There's not enough heat or flame to cause other things to collapse, right? And at that point, it's not really even causing other items within a room or something to catch fire. But then as it grows bigger and larger and starts producing enough heat to where the fire begins to grow. So now we're in the growth stage, okay? We're looking at collapse potential, hazards to us in the building. You know, if we're going to make our fire attack, making that fire attack while the fire is still in that incipient stage, that's great. Fire hasn't got that head of steam built up. We're really ready to make a quick attack on that fire, knock it down quick. Once it's moved into this growth stage, it's getting more dangerous for us. The collapse is more of a probability. Flames are spreading, right? If you look at this growth chart here, um, you can see that that lower line is showing as it passes through the growth stage and it's getting close to the fully developed stage. If it's ventilation controlled fire, if the amount of oxygen available is what's controlling that fire, the fire is going to die down a little bit faster. So you see that curve is much lower and it can change some activity when we get into that decay section, as compared to what we would consider a fuel controlled fire, where it's going to continue to grow. It's got plenty of fuel. The fuel is burning more and more. As we reach that developed stage, we'll see much higher intensity fire. So then we get into that fully developed stage. This is where the fire is just burning, probably seeing a flashover. Okay, we're seeing flashover every surface that's not burning within the room simultaneously ignites. That's a flashover. That's happening when we get to that fully developed stage. Okay. Then at some point in time, that fire is going to start dying back off again, and we move into the decay stage where the fire growth is on its downward swing. If we're trying to attack the fire during that fully developed, that can be some of the most dangerous time there. It's got the most heat, the worst conditions on the inside. If we're late showing up to the fire, we may catch the fire in that decay stage. The fire's already on its way down, ready to burning itself out. We've got to give it a little bit of help to finish it off. Notice though on the bottom, on that ventilation controlled fire, when it gets into that decay, you see how that dotted line jumps back up again. In a ventilation controlled fire, that line is showing us the introduction of oxygen. And when you introduce oxygen into that ventilation controlled fire, it may have been decaying. The fire may have been getting smaller because it couldn't breathe, because it didn't have that oxygen. If that's reintroduced, we're back into a growth stage and we can see that increase in fire activity. So as part of our size up, we're looking at that and trying to figure out, are we in a ventilation controlled fire where the fire is just sort of snuffed out without enough oxygen? And if so, we've got to be careful as we attack the fire, be careful how we're introducing oxygen along with our hose streams and along with us as we're entering the building. Okay. Structural collapse potential. We're looking at the potential for the building to collapse as part of our size up. What's that potential going to be? You know, is the building going to fail? If it does, how will it collapse? And when will it fail? You know, as the fire progresses, if it's getting ahead of us, our suppression efforts aren't working. That's part of our continual size up that we're doing. We may have to back off a ways. We may have to get prepared to clear a collapse zone in case the building fails. All right. Some of the factors that may contribute to that from the fire, you know, structural failure of a building or any portion of it could be from the fire, could be from the wind. think about adding water to the fire, right? As we're putting water into the windows of that building, especially if it's got multiple floors, if you're pumping a lot of water into that second, third floor window, you're putting a lot of weight in the building. Talk about that just a little bit. Anything that jeopardizes the stability of that building, we've got to be cautious of. And that could be anything from an earthquake, a flood, something other natural. It could be caused by lack of care to the building, like we just talked about. It could be due to the fire, could be due to the water that we're adding. So when we're doing those pre-plans that we talked about, it's sort of the very first part of this scene size up. That's what we're looking at there. We're considering that collapse potential and making some notes on that so that we can do that. Other things that may contribute to that structural collapse could be like a renovation. Somebody changes the interior structure of the building and they didn't know that those walls they removed were load-bearing walls. That can lead to any kind of additions or alterations. A lot of times here in Africa, we see buildings and the building is sort of finished, but the top floor, you can see the rebar sticking out at the top where they've left room to add more floors down the road when money comes available or we need more space, right? Yeah, but was the bottom half of that building, was that built to hold those extra additions, those extra floors? So maybe the addition of those extra floors may be a contributor to um, a collapse. Maybe they've overloaded the building. If somebody's using a building as a warehouse, it's got multiple floors, and they're not considering the weight of all the items that they're placing in there. So the contents itself can contribute to that. Whole bunch of different stuff, length of fire attached to it, the building construction, building condition. We touched on all of those, right? And remember that structural collapse doesn't happen just during a fire, could happen before the fire, could also happen after we've already extinguished the fire. So that danger doesn't go away. The danger of collapse doesn't go away just because we've finished suppressing the fire. So we've got to evaluate that, use that as part of our continual scene size up. I mentioned this one before, um, just to think about that a little bit. Um, uh, for me, in the US, using our measurements, we're using gallons and pounds, right? So, gallon, usually we factor about 8 pounds to the gallon for water, right? So, for every gallon of water I pump in there, I'm adding 8 pounds. Um, so, for every, what is it, like 5 liters? 5 liters of water probably weighs well, five kilograms, right? So just think about how much water you pump in. If you've got a 2,000 liter water tank, how much weight are you putting in there at 5 kgs per liter? Okay, so do the math on that. Understand uh, how much danger that is when we're pumping that water into the building. Uh, Indicators of structural instability as we're doing this continuing our scene size up and our continuous scene size up not only after we started but as we're working on the fire. Great little illustration that shows you some indicators of that. Bricks and blocks falling off the building, cracks in walls, bulging walls. Maybe there's a sign on the building that shows when the building was built, giving you an indicator that it's a pretty old building, so what the age is. Um, I don't know if you guys see these or not here in Africa. We've got these ornamental metal stars that we see on a block or a brick building, and those are part of a structural system that repairs the building. There's actually a really long threaded rod that they'll place through the building, and those are like sort of giant nuts that are holding the walls from bulging out. So I know in my area when I see those, I've got to be cautious that building already has some structural weakness or something like that. Maybe you can see the roof sagging a little bit. If you're talking a commercial building that's made of masonry construction, it's made of concrete, and you're seeing smoke coming out through some cracks or something like that. not a good sign. So, really lots of different indicators there that we might have that possible collapse. Um, then you got to start thinking about, well, what's our collapse zone? How much space do we need to give that? And the typical answer for that collapse zone is about 1.5, 1.5 times the height of that building. That's going to be our collapse zone. If that building's going to fall down, those are the most dangerous areas, right? 1.5 times the height of the building. So we need to make sure that we start to clear those areas out. Um, if there's a building right next to that, we need to think about what might happen if this building collapses into the one next to it. That could really increase the size of that collapse zone. So if we think we're seeing some of those indicators that we might get a building collapse while we're doing that continual size up of the scene, we're going to have to account for that. Okay, what kind of actions do we take? If you think that collapse is imminent, right? Collapse is, you see those indicators, this building is about to fall down. What do we do, right? We've got to alert everyone, anybody that's around the area. Be sure we're getting that information to whoever's in command of the incident. If there's anybody inside the building, we've got to begin evacuation, get them out of there, establish that collapse zone, that 1.5 times the height, get that established um, so that if the building collapses, nobody's in there. All right. Be careful about using your deluge guns, your deck gun, whatever you're monitored off the top. That could be really a bad idea once we start to see collapses imminent. And then be sure that you're doing what we call taking PAR. We call that a uh, personnel accountability report, right? Checking to make sure are all the guys that came with us here available outside of that collapse, that emergency evacuation zone. All right. After we've extinguished the fire, um, we still have to think about collapse, even though the fire's out. As we do salvage and overhaul, right? We're going to go in there, look at this image here. You see things are burning, the fire's not out yet, but imagine that we're standing there and we can knock all that fire down and the fire's out. What are we going to do next? Probably going to start pulling some of those metal panels off and getting them out of the way. We're exposing some void spaces and trying to make sure the fire's not going to rekindle or it's not going to restart. As we start pulling stuff off of the building and out of the building, are we doing something there that may prompt a collapse or may cause some kind of a building collapse, right? So uh, think about some of those factors too. Even though the fire's out, we're adding more water weight onto things as we're cooling everything off. So think about that. Take those considerations in mind. All right. I talked about this sort of throughout the whole thing, right? Scene size up doesn't happen just when we first get to the scene. It's ongoing. We're doing that all the time. We're trying to make sure that we're continuously evaluating, sizing things up as fire conditions change. We're updating our instant action plan, whether that's just in our head or on paper, changing what we do, communicating that um, to everybody that's on the scene, what they need to do. So we're continuous with that size up. And then that even carries on after the incident's been brought under control, right? You've got to size up what's going on there after the fire's extinguished as well. Okay, so um, what are we going to do to establish a sort of safe zones for the public to keep people out of the building? What else do we have to do to render the area safe before we leave? So lots of different possibilities there, lots of different things that we need to think about from the size up. All right. Uh, that's a lot of just sort of our main content that we've got there in that. So let's just talk our way through this yet one more time of what we're looking at when we're talking about doing this size up process throughout the incident, right? So We're beginning, when did we say that we began our size up? Uh, Pre-planning, right? Before we ever get the fire call in that area, if we can get there and have a plan, especially in our commercial districts, having some sort of a pre-plan of what we're going to do in the informal settlements, places that there's lots of incidences of fire. So we're starting with our whole scene size up with pre-planning well before the call has even come out. After we've thought about our pre-planning, now we're beginning our size up when the telephone call comes in. So the control room has rung the bell. Uh, they've made the announcement or told the station officer where the incident's at, the information from the caller. As we're relayed that information, we're in the fire appliance. We're making our way down the road to the incident. We're thinking about all that stuff. We're thinking about the neighborhood that it's in, the types of structures that are there, anything that we know from that pre-plan. What did the callers say? Did they describe what building was on fire? What did they describe? Did they say we could see fire out of every window? Did they say there's only a light smoke condition? What are we thinking about there? Okay. Why are we doing this? Of course, we're considering this stuff already, trying to get that picture in our mind so that we're prepared when we get on the scene. Now, maybe that picture in our mind may change when we get on the scene, and that's where we're going to do our first 360, our first complete walk around of the incident scene. We're going to walk looking at it from every angle, from every direction of the compass. That's why we call it that 360 to get the complete picture of what's going on within the building. As we're doing that, we're looking at all sorts of different things. We're looking at building construction. We're looking at flow paths. We're looking at smoke. We're looking at the flames, all sorts of things that we talked about earlier. We're gathering that information. As we gather that information, we're developing our incident action plan, which is how we're going to attack the fire. We're looking at where we're going to spray water from the outside, where we might be able to access from the inside to get to the fire, covering all of those different ideas. Okay? Why are we doing these size ups? Again, it's to make us more efficient and more effective. We're trying to impact our firefighter safety. Or if this is any other incident, if you're an EMS person, you're on here joining us, um, you know, this relates to you as well, right? Sizing up your incident, looking for hazards, looking for your plan of treatment, all of that sort of stuff. Okay. When are we doing those? Again, I mentioned it pre-arrival, on the way, as soon as we arrive, and then ongoing. We're going to continually try to keep doing those walk-arounds, keep evaluating. Maybe things are changing. The condition of the building might be changing. How does the fire reacting to our water application? Is the fire in which stage is it in? Incipient, growth, decay, where are we at on that curve? Um, what's the building type? What's the building style? We'll talk about that next week. We'll look at building construction and how that plays into how the fire burns or the potentials for collapse, all that sort of stuff. Okay. How long's the fire been going? That's something we're certainly going to consider, and the impact on the structural components. It's also going to tell us whether we might still be in the growth stage, whether we're seeing some fire activity that indicates we're back into that decay stage, right? And then we spend a lot of time talking about that collapse, figuring out what our collapse zones may be, looking for those indicators of collapse, smoke from the cracks, bulging walls, paint blistering, windows cracking, windows completely blackened over, all those different indicators of what the fire's doing inside the building. Okay. So that's just sort of a quick look around at scene size up and what we might want to be doing there with our scene size up. We'll maybe take an opportunity. Let me take a quick peek at the chat and see what's going on in the chat. Let's clean my camera lens. I'm not very clean there. There, I'm a little better. There we go. So let me just make a little bit of an adjustment here. I'm gonna let you guys unmute yourselves if you'd like. Do we have any questions about that scene size up from anything that I may have presented there as I get ready to pull up the chat here and see if I missed anything there. Okay, looks like I don't have any questions in the chat. Questions for you. If you've got a question for us, you can use the raise hand feature. You can type a question into the chat, or you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question as we look at scene size up.